Listen to me if you want to live. Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast, demanding you follow my instructions from the implant in your ear. In recent years, we've all become accustomed to action films being made with faster and faster cuts. If you've watched the work of Michael Bay or Tony Scott, you'll know the form. Gone, it seems, are the days when directors would simply hold a shot. Instead, we're subjected to films that feel like they've been made by a hyperactive toddler with ADHD. If you want to see the nadir of this trend, we direct you to the notorious scene in Taken 3 where Liam Neeson takes 6 seconds and 15 cuts to climb a fence. Refreshingly, there's been signs, though, that filmmakers are tiring of a cinema of sensory assault. For in the last few years, we've seen a coterie of films where directors have been shooting extended sequences and indeed entire films as if they were one take. Extraction, One Shot, 1917, to name just a few. And to that list, you can add the film we're looking at here. For, over the course of its 2-hour plus runtime, it plays out as if it were a single shot. So on this show, we're reviewing 2022's Carter. To help me review the film, I'm joined by a man who does all his work in one take, mostly because he's too idle to do it again. It's my good friend Nick Rehak. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing great, Will, and that statement is incredibly true. Back in my radio days, I was like, that's good enough, and then went right on to the next one.
There you go. That's the spirit. But yeah, we haven't done this in a little while, Nick. And what I mean by that is we haven't really caught up about the broader state of films with exploding helicopters. Now, a couple of months ago, we celebrated our 15th anniversary of Exploding Helicopter. And what were you doing 15 years ago? I was starting counting films with helicopters. What were you doing that was equally as important, I'm sure?
15 years ago would have been 2009. That's one of my this is one of my lost years because I dropped out of college in 2008. I didn't move to New Orleans until 2010. So 2009 was one of those just hanging around and doing odd jobs and stuff until I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. Worst part is still trying to figure out what I want to do with my life.
We're all works in progress, Nick. We're all a work in progress.
I like that. That sounds a lot better.
Well, I mean, over the last 15 years, it's been very productive. I can reassure you of that because we've now found an incredible 849 films with an exploding helicopter. And I thought it would be fun to have a quick look at our latest discovery, which was an exploding helicopter in a Filipino action film from 1997 called Matang Agala. Which, forgive my Filipino pronunciation there. And I got you to have a look at it, as I thought it was a pretty fun sequence. So what did you make of it, Nick?
For you saying that it's from 1997 kind of hurts because this looks like it's from the 80s. This thing was rough. I tell you what, there is a lot of slow motion, and it's not filmed in a way that's slow-mo. I mean, they literally just slow down the film because you can see like the little pops and dirt scratches and stuff on the film stay on screen for like much longer, and they're much more pronounced. And it's like, this is a whole lot. But then when the explosion happens, we get something kind of special out of it. There's a grenade lodged underneath of a tire. Somebody shoots it. It launches the car, which hits the helicopter, and then the helicopter barrel rolls. When's the last time you saw a barrel roll helicopter in a film?
Actually, I did see a barrel rolling helicopter in something I was watching the other day. It's completely gone out of my head, but I was thinking, yeah, that helicopters can't barrel. What the hell? What was it I was watching? Look, we're not going to. This won't make good audio as I try and ransack the last vestiges of my memory. But yeah, bottom line is, it's not something that happens often.
No, not at all. But when it does, you're right. You kind of question it. Like, can they do that? Like, is it possible, or is it just they're kind of going over the top, a la Bollywood style, and physics aren't really the most important thing to worry about?
But I really enjoyed this particular sequence. I mean, sure, Filipino cinema at this time, it wasn't a richly financed form of cinema. So yeah, there is an element of roughness here. But as you were saying, once the explosions get going, I mean, it's a pretty spectacular sequence. So yeah, it's all takes place at the climax of the film. So you've got the heroes are being pursued by this helicopter, and they fire their guns at it, and yeah, as you mentioned, they're able to dispense of it by blowing up this grenade with a gunshot. But then after that, I was really enjoying the sequence after that as well, because then I don't really know what's going on here, but then there's just basically explosives going off everywhere, which are sending these cars shooting up into the air as these two opponents perform a kind of John Woo style diving through the air in slow motion whilst firing two guns at each other. I was just loving how these cars were blowing up, somersaulting into the air. It felt like sort of Michael Bay, sort of like today, rather than something way back in 1997.
It kind of was, because they just go for full excess, right? Like, it's just car after car, and sometimes it's like there's no reason for that to blow up. And then you also watch it and you're like, where's the reload? Where is putting another clip into the gun and continuing to fire it off? What I love the most, I think, is, and because we haven't really seen it, I feel in some time, real fire. Just a real big explosion. None of this CGI nonsense, nothing that kind of cheapens it, just real big fire. But the downside is, if you pay close enough attention during the explosion, you can see at points where it's a model, or you kind of see it still in the background, but the flames and the explosion is covering it up. Like, it's this weird little, I don't know if it's not a proper edit or something, but there's a brief moment where even though we have a helicopter exploding, it's the exact same one behind it, as if they just kind of stashed it in the distance and threw some flames up. It's weird, but at the same time, flames in a barrel roll, I'm here for it.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun, and if you want to check out the scene that we're talking about, you can find this film on YouTube. So yeah, just go and find it on YouTube. Go right to the end of the film, because this is basically the final sequence in the film, and you can enjoy it in all its fiery, excessive glory. Anyway, I think that's enough talking about 1990s Filipino action films. I think it's time we got stuck into Carter. So let's see if the hero of the film can recall what it's all about.
I can't remember anything.
Your name is Carter.
Carter.
There is a device implanted in your ear. You are the only one who can hear me.
사방에 CIA가 깔려 있습니다.
Listen to me.
If you wanna live.
Who are you?
당신의 임무는 정원아를 찾아 북으로 데려오는 것입니다.
A mutant virus has emerged with over 8.5 million infected people.
So the film begins with a special agent waking up in a room with no memory or indeed clothes. Our hero finds himself in the middle of a pandemic that is causing people to erupt into mindless violence. As if our man's day wasn't going badly enough, a voice in his ear tells him that he has a bomb in his mouth that will detonate unless he doesn't follow instructions. Carter is then thrust into a non-stop whirlwind of violence as he's sent on a dangerous mission to stop the spread of the virus. The film is written and directed by Young Byung-gil, who had previously made The Villainess. The film has a user rating of 5.1 on IMDb and a user rating of 2.5 on Letterboxd. As this is a Netflix film, we don't have any box office stats to give you, but the film did rank number 1 in Netflix global top 10 for a time after its release. So with all of that out of the way, Nick, what did you make of Carter?
This is something else. When I started watching the film, I was like, okay, this is going to be something. And as it continued, all of these cuts, all of these edits, yeah, they make it look like it's all one take, but it's clearly not. After a couple scenes, I'm like, I'm just going to start, every time I see an edit, I'm just going to shout edit. And after a while, my jaw started hurting because I was saying edit so often. But it was so distracting. I'd have to rewind it a couple times to catch a plot point or to catch something that was happening, because even though in those moments the camera's a little more steady, it's almost as if you're realizing, oh, we're not cutting and editing anymore. Like, we can focus on these characters but then we're just off doing something else, or something's a red herring, or something is just completely unnecessary, or something is just a twist for the sake of having a twist, or something goofy like that. And then after a while, the film was just boring. There's so many action scenes and there's a lot going on, but it's a boring movie because all you're doing is cutting or going behind a body or shifting the camera at the road only to look back up at what's going on. And I'm like, what are we doing? It's almost as if I was watching a movie and I kept putting my phone in front of my face and then going back to the movie. It's such a massive distraction. It doesn't help the film at all. If they did one or two sequences like that, okay, that's fine. But an entire movie, it doesn't do it for me.
Oh dear, I always feel like I've let you down when I pick a film that you don't enjoy, Nick. I do try to pick ones that you'll appreciate in some way, shape, or form. But I have to say, I am coming at this from a different point of view, because I actually really enjoyed Carter. I completely understand your criticisms of the film. They are completely valid. I think that the ambition of this film is far greater than the technical means that the filmmakers had for trying to execute the type of vision that they've got for this film, with the sort of complexity of the action sequences and the way in which they want to shoot them. Yeah, they've got more ambition for that than they actually have resources in order to pull it all off. But that said, I just enjoyed the headlong fury of this just absolute download of ideas and excitement for the sort of possibilities of what they're trying to pull off. I just really appreciated that deluge of ideas and excitement that just cascaded like a torrent from this particular film. And I say that as somebody who is a film watcher who often gets really irritated by films that don't have some sort of character development, that don't try to invest you in the main characters, don't try and invest you in the plot. I mean, the plot here, I'm not sure it really makes sense. I think that the less you think about it, the better. And typically films which just are sensory experiences are not ones that I tend to appreciate particularly well. I like to feel some investment in what I'm watching. But Carter, I think I just got carried away by the brio, by the ambition of this particular film. And yeah, I really loved it.
I for sure see your point on how they didn't really have the, maybe not technology or finances, to kind of see the full vision. I appreciate how ambitious the film is. I do like the risks that it takes and just the overall technicality of it in order to do all of those edits and actually put the edits together when you're editing the film. I can appreciate all the work that went into it, but it becomes really hard when the polish just doesn't sit right, because it's a film from 2022, but it looks like something from 2002. Just the way some of the effects work are, some of the camera work is, and I'm just, I try to look past that to just kind of look at the meat of it and like, what's this story about and what are these characters doing? But even then, I find myself in a bit of a struggle, because I'm so having to focus on these edits and stuff that's coming through. And the whole time they're happening, I'm thinking, they did this better in Rope, or they did this better in 1917. And I didn't even really care all that much for 1917, but the edits and the little secret, whatever you want to call it, the way they did them worked within the film. We spent time with these characters. It wasn't this like constant moving around and shifting away. The focus was always on the characters. And I think if the film could have done that visually and found different ways to kind of, do these fake edits to make it look like a one-take film, maybe I'd be a little more invested in. Maybe it would have pulled me in. But it just doesn't stick the landing for me. I wouldn't go be like, oh, this film sucked. But no, it's not that. It just didn't land for me.
Well, you mentioned 1917, which is another film that employs a similar filmmaking technique or filmmaking gimmick, and I wondered, what do you think about that type of technique, that type of gimmick. I mean, I always think it's interesting when a filmmaker tries to make a project in a fashion like this, because it both demands creativity, but it also cuts off creativity as you're sort of denied a lot of choices. If you can't, if you're just going to have it shoot continuously with one camera, then you're sort of denying yourself a whole sort of range of typical editing techniques. So where do you stand on filmmakers kind of employing a set of rules, I guess, that they're going to use when they're making a film?
I wouldn't say 50-50. I think it's more 60-40. I enjoy it versus not enjoying it. But I also think, like you said, you have a lot of really valid points. It all depends on the application and what they're doing with it. Are they doing something like Rope, for example, right? Where it kind of plays out like a stage play, but the way we hold on these characters, the way the camera flows, all it does is just constantly build up the tension, and you're stuck in the room with the tension. There's no editing away. There's no taking a pause. It's just a consistent ramp up of the tension and of the stress you're feeling for these characters. In 1917, we have these moments with the characters where we can kind of catch our breath after a post-war. We can see how these characters in real time feel the effects of what's going on. Now, it does limit them, and they do have to kind of play around with how they get from A to B. But in that particular film, I think they do it in creative ways. And I think they do it in a way that's not necessarily boring for the home audience, because that's a big key of it. You could do a one-take thing, but if it's not interesting, who cares? And if you're making a film for the sake of saying, hey, I did a film, and the whole thing is like, in one continuous take or something like that, then what are you really doing it for? I feel like it's a fine line to walk, and most of the time it's for a good cause. But every so often, like I said, you get one that, while ambitious and technically is really impressive, just doesn't land.
Okay. Well, now this film is 2 hours. Is it 2 hours 10, 2 hours 15 long?
About that, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty relentless, like action throughout the whole thing. So, what was your favorite action sequence here? Because I mean, there were certainly plenty to choose from.
I think the one that caught my eye the most, and I think because it's just like really a cold splash of water to the face, was the opening fight sequence in that bathhouse, because there's hundreds of people around, and he's fighting them off left and right, just slashing tendons and muscles and other connective tissues within the body left and right, and it just gets so outrageous so quickly, but at the same time it's like weirdly believable. So you're in this mindset of like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've seen, but I could also, like, it kind of makes sense. Like, this could in a weird way genuinely happen. And a lot of what makes that scene impressive is just the choreography of it all. Not just of the two guys fighting, but of how many people end up fighting, and then what they're doing in the background and how to make it not look like they're just standing there looking at the camera being like, well, what do I do now? Like, it's one of those just really impressive, and like I said, splash of water to the faces, where it's like, oh, this is the kind of movie we're going to see today. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a real statement of intent, pretty quick out of the gate of this film, because we've had a little bit of exposition in the previous scene, and then we go into that bathhouse fight sequence, and I completely agree. It's like it's a as you say, it's a splash of water to the face. It's a big statement. Okay, look, this is the type of movie this is going to be. So sort of strap yourselves in. But one element of this film that I found interesting and also a bit frustrating was I guess the plot. As I said earlier, if you don't think, it's the best thing to do is to just not think about it too much. And it just felt to me, I guess there are many things you can say about the plot. It's overly complicated. I'm not sure it really makes sense. But there's this idea within the film that, I mean, you could classify this as a zombie film, but it kind of felt like that was actually sort of an underused aspect to the film. And you could just have easily have dispensed with that part of the plot and just have run with the fact that there's this virus and they need to rescue this scientist in order to preserve the possibility of developing a vaccine. I mean, and yeah, I mean, we do obviously get some sequences with these sort of I don't know what you call them, super powered, kind of impervious to pain sort of people who've been infected by the virus, aka the zombies. But kind of felt that was I was expecting, they set that up right at the beginning of the film, and it's only right at the end that plays into it. And I didn't really feel like that played into it in any greatly exciting way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if they took it out, the film would be just fine. If anything, it would be trimmed down just a little bit leaner. Not by much, but, still enough. I had just watched Train to Busan for the first time a month ago. So when I see that part of the film, I'm like, oh, okay, this is going to be similar to Train to Busan, but it's just going to be, slightly different at the same time. And then when it comes out that they're, like you said, these like super powered, not necessarily mutants, but for sure something has happened to their brain, and it's just this very primordial eat to survive, kill kind of thing. It's like, okay, this is interesting. Let's see how it plays. Let's see how they envelop the lore of it. How does this happen? What is the biology like? What does the body go through? Are we going to see breakdowns of somebody slowly getting sick? Are we going to get the whole, last minute you find out one of your favorite characters or the sweetest character got bit and they didn't want to tell anybody, and now it's going to become a thing, and there's a big emotional we have to kill you now kind of thing. Like, you're expecting something like that, but then it doesn't show up, but you're like, okay, so maybe they're trying something different, and then nothing really comes of it. It almost feels like, let's just have this in our pockets in case we ride ourselves into a corner. Then we can just say, and just before that, oh, and then these creatures come back, and oh no, now we all got to figure out what to do. Like, it's another one of those things, just didn't quite stick the landing, and I feel like if they would have just trimmed it down and been a little more focused, it would have been a stronger film overall.
Oh, I can definitely, as much as I enjoy this film, I really do agree that I think some editing here and trimming this down under 2 hours, maybe knocking 20 minutes out of it. So I suspect that would have probably improved the film, but we'll never know. But one thing that did strike me as I was watching this film was the sort of the filmmaking, techniques that are employed here, and it just made me, think about the way in which it just seems that, the more computer games become like films, the more films become like computer games. And I was watching Carter, and I was feeling it just reminded me of some sort of shooter game, some first person shooter type game where you can spin the, especially in terms of the camera work, where in those computer games you can just sort of spin the camera around your character and sort of zoom off in different directions, and that kind of continually moving camera work in this film really sort of reminded me of the sort of like computer games.
Oh, absolutely. And there's some stuff that is just kind of blatant, right? There's a couple times where the camera kind of mounts behind the character or characters, and you have like a shot from the shoulder up, and you see the enemies they're about to tackle and take on. And it becomes like this third-person view that you would see in something like Grand Theft Auto. And occasionally there's a first person. You actually, the hands firing, and I can't remember off the top of my head which scene, but there's like a scene with like a mirror kind of thing too, and that's very first-person shooter-esque. And it can be fun at times, but when it's like done, it's like, okay, that's cool that you can do that. Now do something just a little bit different with it. Push it a little bit more creatively instead of it just kind of being like the same thing again and again. And it's funny too, because as video games get more experimental, especially like Hideo Kojima, who's known mostly for Metal Gear and the Death Stranding games, there's times in the game where you have control of the camera and you can just move the camera around anywhere. You can have, if two characters are talking, you can focus on a tree behind them and just watch that, even though they're having the conversation. And it feels like that sometimes in this film, like I said, when they do an edit and it swings to like, look what this car over here is doing. Oh, and now we're back to the fight. And it just has that kind of not cheap feel, because video games, their production budgets are obviously getting bigger and bigger as the technology evolves, but it just starts to feel a little cheap. In that, I'm like, I would rather play a game. I would rather this be a game that I'm playing instead of watching it, because then, there's a little more enjoyment out of it. There's just a little more energy. There's just something more to it.
Well, fair enough. Okay, I think we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
Hey, dudes and foxy ladies, look out. Here comes the meanest mother in town. Shadow of the Dragon. Not since Bruce Lee has the screen seen such skull-busting action. It's every thrill in the book and then some. Shadow of the Dragon takes on all comers. More action and excitement than you could pack into a lifetime. He tears them up piece by piece. Shadow of the Dragon comes on strong like King Kong. The new international martial arts champion tears him apart. He's rough, tough, and hard to bluff. No eye is quick enough. No hand is tough enough. No dude is mean enough to get him. One dude or an army, it makes no difference to the Shadow of the Dragon. Big or small, he gets them all. So he can get down and do it in Shadow of the Dragon.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. This occurs towards the end of the film. Our heroes are trying to make their getaway on board a train that's pursued by a trio of helicopters. It's a complicated scene, and there's a lot to get through, so I'm skimping on a few details. But in short, one of the helicopters fires a rocket to try and kill Carter, who's on top of the train. Carter escapes, but the exploding rocket causes one of the other helicopters that's become accidentally tethered to the train to lose control, hit the ground, and explode. A second helicopter explodes after it's hit by gunfire, causing it to crash to the ground and explode. And finally, two more choppers blow up after they crash into each other, causing them to smash into the ground and blow up. So, Nick, what did you make of all the exploding helicopter action?
This was so much fun. This was an incredible 3-course meal that just delivered and delivered and delivered. And even if the effects work wasn't the best all the time, it was still some of the most fun I've had watching exploding helicopters since you've started having me on the show. We've watched a lot of great movies. We've seen a lot of great exploding helicopters, but these three are just so much fun because we get something different with each one that we don't typically see in other films, right? In the first explosion, the helicopter just goes slamming right down. It almost looks like a belly flop. And the effects work, if you kind of look at it, almost it looks like the helicopter's like pushing its belly out to get like maximum flop on it, which is a weird thing to say, but just the way it kind of flops down and slaps is incredible to see. But we also get ripple effects. Rarely with exploding helicopters, and you can attest to this more than I can, but I feel rarely do we see extended havoc on an explosion, right? We just have the explosion and we cut to a character doing something and there's smoke in the distance, or we go off and do whatever, and we don't really see more of it. But here we see still the wreckage laying there, and we see immediate effects on, especially this first one. There's additional cars blowing up. There's bodies being launched in the air because of the exploding cars. Like, there's just so much more energy to it post-explosion, and I think that's really exciting. On the second one, we get a rare tail fire. Not the rear rotor, but the tail that kind of is connecting the body to that back rotor, because it starts with a little fire there as it tears through part of the train, and then we just get a fire and then just one big kaboom. And it's a good-looking kaboom, but just a different part of the helicopter burning for once. Like, that's just, it's neat to see. And then the third one, this is the penultimate, right? Or the ultimate, right? It's a crisscross collision of two helicopters. You can't go wrong there. They immediately bust apart like a Lego set, which is kind of funny because it's literally, it just falls apart. We've got cockpits rolling around on the ground. There's fire and explosions everywhere. it kind of pushes and it goes on just a little too long, but it also does this weird physics thing, and I want to know if you picked up on it or noticed this at all. Somehow with the explosions being in front of the tunnel the way it is, it creates this weird wind tunnel effect and somehow pulls this military wagon type vehicle towards the tunnel. It hits a bunch of stuff and then just explodes. Did you, or did I miss something? And that's weird, but it feels like just like something pulled the car into the explosion. It's not making sense.
Well, I don't remember that particular sort of moment within the sequence. You'll have to forgive me, but I mean the physics of this scene overall, they don't exist in the known universe, because in order to it's sort of as part of the kind of first helicopter explosion that blows up. I mean, we've got Carter. I think he's jumped out of a helicopter onto this crane that's sort of attached to the rear car of the train, and he then runs up the top of the crane and then leaps forward onto another helicopter, and you just wouldn't be able to on a train that is moving forward at, I don't know, 40, 50 miles an hour, you wouldn't be able to run forward and then jump forward. You wouldn't have, no human has that power of acceleration to be able to, you'd go to leap off the front and then you'd just find that the train has accelerated past you. You'd be going backwards, not forwards. It's just a complete impossibility in the realms of physics. And actually, I've remembered where I saw the barrel roll of the helicopter. It was in this sequence in this Carter, and really embarrassed. Yeah, what was that film I was watching with the barrel? It's the film I'm reviewing for the podcast. But, never mind. Look, I'm an aging man. My booze-addled brain is my increasingly limited powers of recall. But I mean, this was. I feel like we're really by this point we're really moving towards the end of the film, and it's not like they've been keeping their powder dry for the previous 2 hours. And so I think it's really impressive that they can still find a kind of like a suitably big, suitably imaginative sequence to cap off the film that they are just looking to wrap up.
It's super imaginative too, because there's times where it almost feels like the helicopters are weird octopuses, in a sense that you have these people hanging from wires from the helicopter, like trying to go after people and like trying to get inside the train, and they're shooting and they're doing gun stuff, and he's like jumping off the crane to try to catch them and like get them stuck. At one point he gets an arm of a claw to like come out and grab and hold one of the guys, and it's like essentially pulling this helicopter with it. Like it gets absurd, and it gets into that video game realm. I mean, that whole scene with like the body and the people hanging from the helicopters, not to quote or bring him up again, but that's like a Hideo Kojima wet dream. Like that is something that dude is into. Just bizarre stuff you don't typically see in action sequences, but in a weird way it works. It takes away from the fact that this train has been going in a straight line for a very long time. I mean, there's no turns, there's no bends. Something like that would have made it exciting. Like the train has to take a left, it has to go over a canyon, it has to go, here comes a tunnel, like something. It doesn't rely on that. It just relies on this insane action and these fantastic explosions.
Okay. Well, Nick, I'm glad that you, whatever the reservations you had about the rest of the film, I'm glad you enjoyed the exploding helicopter sequence. That warms my cockles. Means we can end this show on a positive note, and that pleases me. But I think we should probably wrap things up there for this show. So, Nick, thank you for joining me once again. Before you go, do you want to take a moment to plug some of your stuff?
Sure, absolutely. Over on the rabbitholepodcasts.com website /network, you can find me on episodes of Play MST for Me, as well as Lyrical Innuendo. And occasionally, you'll catch me doing a couple spots and episodes over at Movies, Films, and Flicks.
And as always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website at explodinghelicopter.com for more information and reviews about films where helicopters explode. You can also follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd. The podcast is also now on YouTube if you prefer to listen to us that way. We'll be back soon, but until then, what should people do, Nick?
Keep watching the skies for those exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.